Welcome to our channel. Are you ready to embark on thrilling adventures across the cosmos, encounter mysterious alien civilizations, and explore the unknown depths of space? If so, you've come to the right place. Subscribe and join our community of fellow sci-fi enthusiasts who love diving into epic tales and futuristic explorations. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an exciting new story. We want to hear from you. Leave a comment below sharing your favorite sci-fi moment, or let us know what kind of adventures you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps us create the stories you crave. Now sit back, relax, and prepare to journey beyond the stars as we begin our latest saga.
The silence of the night was shattered by a thunderous knock at the door,
making Daryn Kross flinch mid-stretch. His tiny prefab on the outskirts of Cygna Base. A desolate Martian colony. Rarely saw visitors. Especially not at this hour. Still catching his breath from a grueling weightlifting session, Daryn threw on a tank top and approached the door cautiously. He hadn't been expecting anyone. And out here, surprises were rarely good. When the door slid open, it revealed something wholly unexpected, a massive steel crate stamped with glowing alien glyphs. And beside it stood an Aelari courier. Its translucent skin shimmering faintly. "Delivery for Daryn Kross of Earth," it said flatly, thrusting a datapad toward him. The crate, and the name of its sender, Lord Thyxar of the Aelari Syndicate, set off alarms in his mind. He didn't need to remember every job he'd taken during his mercenary days to know this wouldn't be simple. For years, Daryn had drifted across the galaxy, fighting battles that weren't his for credits he rarely kept. The life of a mercenary wasn't glamorous. But it was clear-cut: contracts, combat, and a cold drink to wash away the dust. Eventually, though, the years of danger and isolation caught up to him. He left that life behind and settled on Mars, choosing the solitude of Cygna Base over the chaos of starships and battlefields. But even here, far removed from his past, it seemed the galaxy wasn't done with him yet. As he signed for the mysterious crate and watched the courier vanish into the night, Daryn couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. The alien glyphs pulsing on the crate's surface felt like a warning, not a gift. With a sigh, he ran his hands over the engraved metal. Whatever was inside, it had already disrupted the quiet life he'd worked so hard to build. The crate's control panel blinked to life, and a soft hum filled the air as the front panel dissolved, revealing a smaller chamber within. A holographic projection flickered into existence, a rotund, lavender-skinned alien adorned in lavish red and gold robes. "Greetings, Daryn Kross," the alien began, his voice thick with formality and an undercurrent of excitement. "I trust this message finds you well. You may not recall our encounter at the Nexus outpost, but I assure you, I have never forgotten." Daryn leaned back on his heels, brow furrowing. Nexus outpost. The name dredged up a hazy memory of an interstellar dive. Its halls teeming with smugglers, traders, and mercenaries. He remembered breaking up a bar fight, some unlucky alien caught in the crossfire of an Elja kill squad. Had that been? "I owe you my life," the alien continued, his jowls quivering. "Your courage not only saved me but also prevented a disastrous diplomatic incident. I have long sought a way to repay such bravery." Daryn snorted softly. "All in a day's work." The alien's holographic face lit up with pride. "On my homeworld, there is no greater honor than the gift of an Aelarian companion. I have chosen one of unparalleled grace and beauty to serve you. She is a token of my eternal gratitude." Daryn's stomach dropped. "Wait. What?" The hologram ignored his protest. "Simply speak the words. Awaken my star, to rouse her from stasis." I trust she will bring you joy and comfort beyond measure. The projection vanished, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Daryn stared at the now open crate, his pulse quickening. Nestled within was a figure that seemed carved from the dreams of some alien artist. Her mint-green skin shimmered softly, and her long, seafoam blue hair cascaded like a river down her back. She was breathtakingly beautiful, and utterly still, as if frozen in time. What the hell? Daryn muttered under his breath. He pressed his palm against his forehead, trying to process the absurdity of the situation. Who the hell gifts a person? Yet, as his eyes drifted back to her serene face, framed by the faint glow of the stasis chamber, he felt a strange pull. It wasn't just her beauty, it was the sheer wrongness of it all. The idea that someone could be treated as a gift, a possession. But there was no turning back now. He needed answers. With a deep breath, Daryn spoke the words. Awaken. My star. Her golden eyes fluttered open, glowing softly like twin suns. She sat up with a fluid grace, her movements unnervingly precise. When her gaze met his, a faint smile touched her lips, and her voice, melodic and soft, filled the room. Greetings, Master, she said, bowing her head. I am Liora, your humble servant. How may I bring you joy? Daryn paced the small living room of his prefab unit, his thoughts a chaotic swirl. Across the room, Liora stood silently, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Her golden eyes followed his every move with an expression of quiet anticipation. Okay. Let's get something straight, he began, stopping mid-stride. I don't know what kind of customs you're used to, but here on Earth, or Mars, in this case, we don't treat people like property. You're not my servant. And you sure as hell aren't here to bring me joy. Got it? Liora tilted her head, her seafoam hair cascading over her shoulder. I understand. Master Daryn, she said softly. I will endeavor to bring you joy in ways that align with your customs. He groaned, dragging a hand down his face. That's not what I meant. Stop calling me Master. Just Daryn is fine. As you wish. Daryn. Her voice caressed his name like a delicate melody. And he cursed under his breath, frustrated with how easily she unsettled him. I need coffee, he muttered, retreating to the kitchenette. As he busied himself with brewing a cup, Liora appeared at his side so quietly he nearly dropped the mug. Do you wish for assistance? She asked earnestly. I have researched the preparation of human beverages. I could. No, he interrupted, holding up a hand. I've got this. You don't have to do anything. Just, sit down or something. Her lips pressed into a line of concern. But she nodded obediently, stepping back to perch on the edge of the couch. Daryn watched her from the corner of his eye. She sat ramrod straight, her hands neatly folded in her lap, as if waiting for some invisible signal to spring into action. He sighed. You don't have to sit like that. You know. Relax. Relax, she echoed, as if tasting the word for the first time. What does that entail? It means. I don't know. Lean back. Put your feet up. Do something you enjoy. She looked down at her hands, her expression thoughtful. I am programmed to enjoy serving. Without tasks. I feel aimless. Daryn pinched the bridge of his nose. This was going to be harder than he thought. Later that day, Daryn decided fresh air might help clear his mind, and Liora's. If that was even possible. He led her out of the prefab and onto the dusty streets of Cygna Base. The settlement was bustling with activity. Its corridors filled with traders, engineers, and miners. Liora's presence turned heads immediately. Her radiant green skin and otherworldly beauty were impossible to ignore. Daryn felt the weight of their stares and instinctively positioned himself closer to her, as if shielding her from the curiosity of the crowd. "Why do they look at us this way?" Liora asked, her voice tinged with innocent curiosity. "Because you stand out," he replied, keeping his tone even. "And people love staring at what they don't understand." "Is that bad?" "Not always," he admitted. "But sometimes it's better to blend in." He steered her toward a clothing shop, determined to find her something less eye-catching than her shimmering bodysuit. The shopkeeper, a stout woman with a cybernetic arm, raised an eyebrow at Liora's appearance but didn't comment. As Daryn rummaged through racks of sundresses and casual wear, Liora gravitated toward the more extravagant options: sequined gowns, plunging necklines, and fabrics that sparkled like starlight. "What about this?" she asked, holding up a particularly scandalous piece of attire. Daryn snorted. "We're not dressing for a gala. Try something simpler." After much coaxing, Liora emerged from the dressing room in a modest sundress. The soft fabric flowed around her, accentuating her grace without being overtly provocative. She looked stunning, in a way that made Daryn's chest tighten. "It's perfect," he said gruffly. "We'll take it." Their next stop was a small cafe in the heart of the settlement. Daryn ordered a couple of burgers, curious to see how Liora would react to human food. When the plates arrived, she examined hers with the intense focus of a scientist. "What is this?" she asked, poking at the bun. "A burger," he replied. "It's food. You eat it." Tentatively, she picked it up and took a small bite. Her eyes widened, and she let out a soft moan of delight. "This is extraordinary. The flavors are complex, yet harmonious." Daryn chuckled. "Yeah. They're all right." She took another bite, her enthusiasm drawing amused glances from nearby patrons. When a dollop of ketchup landed on her cheek, Daryn reached over instinctively to wipe it away. The contact lingered a moment too long, and when he pulled back, Liora's golden eyes locked onto his. "Thank you," she said softly, her gaze unwavering. Daryn cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "No problem. Just be careful with the ketchup." As the day wore on, Daryn found himself more and more captivated by Liora's wonder at the simplest things. The way she marveled at a passing maglev train or laughed at the antics of a street performer made him see his dusty, monotonous world in a new light. But her innocence also made her vulnerable. When a group of rowdy miners approached them, their crude remarks directed at Liora, Daryn's temper flared. "Why don't you let us show her a good time?" one of them jeered. Before Daryn could respond, Liora tilted her head and asked, "Are you offering pleasure services?" "That's very kind. But I must decline. My time is dedicated to Daryn." The miners erupted in laughter, their comments growing lewder. Daryn stepped between them and Liora, his fists clenching. "Back off," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. One of the miners sneered. "What's the matter? Afraid she'll trade up?" The fight that followed was swift and brutal. Daryn's training as a soldier kicked in, and he dispatched his attackers with precision, his body moving on instinct. When the dust settled, he turned to find Liora standing over a groaning miner, her expression serene. "Zan, no. Aelarian pleasure training includes defensive techniques, she explained. Nudging the man with her foot. Disabling attackers is a priority. Daryn couldn't help but laugh. Despite the sting of his split lip. You're full of surprises. Aren't you? She tilted her head. A faint smile gracing her lips. I exist to please. Daryn. He sighed. Knowing there was still so much to teach her. But as she beamed at him with a mix of gratitude and admiration, he realized she was teaching him something. 2. How to find joy in the unexpected. The days that followed were a whirlwind of adjustments. Daryn was beginning to find some semblance of routine with Liora in his life. But her presence brought challenges he hadn't anticipated. While she had started to grasp basic human customs, her naivety and programmed instincts still led to awkward, sometimes dangerous, situations. Daryn decided it was time for Liora to learn more about human culture. So he brought her to Crimson Haven, a larger settlement near Cygna Base. The streets were bustling, vibrant with traders hawking their wares, children playing, and performers entertaining passers-by. Liora clung to his side, her golden eyes wide as she took in the sights and sounds. She wore a modest outfit, one Daryn had carefully picked out, but her striking green skin and radiant beauty still drew attention. At one of the market stalls, Daryn haggled with a vendor over some spare parts for his aging rover. Behind him, Liora wandered a few steps away, drawn by the sparkle of a jewelry display. The vendor, noticing her, smirked. Got yourself a rare one. Haven't you? He commented slyly to Daryn. Bet she cost a fortune. Daryn's jaw tightened. She's not for sale. Pity, the vendor chuckled. That one could fetch enough to buy a new ship. Before Daryn could retort, Liora returned, holding a delicate necklace. Daryn. Is this an appropriate gift for expressing gratitude? I wish to thank you for your kindness. The vendor chuckled again. But Daryn quickly snatched the necklace from her hands and placed it back on the display. We're not buying that. Liora. And stop wandering off. But. No buts, he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Liora lowered her gaze, clearly chastened. And Daryn immediately felt a pang of guilt. Look. I don't want you getting the wrong idea about what's appropriate. Okay. Yes. Daryn, she murmured. I understand. But as they walked away, her golden eyes lingered on the necklace, her expression unreadable. That evening, Daryn and Liora stopped at a small diner in Crimson Haven. Leora's curiosity about human food had grown, and Daryn figured it was a safe way to end their outing. The two settled into a booth, and Liora pored over the menu with her usual intensity. Do you think this pizza will be as delightful as the burger? She asked, her voice filled with excitement. Probably. Daryn replied with a smirk. You'll like it. Their peaceful dinner, however, was interrupted when a group of burly miners stumbled into the diner. Clearly intoxicated. Their loud voices and raucous laughter filled the small space. And it didn't take long for their attention to zero in on Liora. Well. Look what we have here, one of them drawled, swaggering over to their table. You sure you're in the right place? Sweetheart. Don't see many pretty things like you around here. Daryn tensed. She's with me. Back off. Oh. We're just being friendly, another miner chimed in, leering. No harm in a little conversation. Right? Liora tilted her head, clearly trying to interpret the situation. Daryn has already informed me that I am not to entertain strangers, she said simply. Your advances are unwelcome. The miners laughed. Their amusement laced with malice. Oh. She's got a sharp tongue. Doesn't she? One sneered. Maybe we should teach her some manners. Before Daryn could respond, one of them reached out to grab Liora's arm. In a blur of motion, she twisted free and delivered a precise strike to his wrist. The miner yelped, clutching his hand. Aelarian self-defense protocols activated. Liora said calmly, please refrain from hostile actions. The room fell silent as the remaining miners stared at her in disbelief. Then, with a roar, they lunged at Daryn. Daryn reacted instinctively. Years of combat training kicking in. He dodged a wild punch and retaliated with a brutal uppercut, sending one miner sprawling. Another grabbed him from behind. But Daryn drove his elbow into the man's ribs, breaking free. Meanwhile, Liora moved with a dancer's grace, disabling attackers with quick, precise blows. Within minutes, the confrontation was over. The miners lay groaning on the floor. And Daryn turned to Liora, his chest heaving. You okay? He asked, scanning her for injuries. I am unharmed, she replied, her voice steady. I was prepared to defend myself, as per my training. Daryn exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Yeah. Well. Maybe tone it down next time. We're trying to keep a low profile. Remember? Liora nodded solemnly. I will remember. Daryn. Thank you for protecting me. He shook his head, chuckling despite himself. I think you did most of the protecting. Back at the prefab that night, Daryn sat across from Liora, a mug of coffee in his hands. The adrenaline from the fight had worn off, leaving him drained but contemplative. I need to ask you something, he began, his tone serious. Do you ever? I don't know. Think about what you want. Not what you're programmed for, but what you actually want. Liora's expression softened. I have not been asked that question before. Well, I'm asking now. Daryn pressed. You're not a machine. Liora. You're a person. You don't have to do what anyone tells you, not me. Not some Aelari baron. You can make your own choices. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the table. I do not know who I am without a purpose, she admitted. I was created to serve. Without that, I feel lost. Daryn leaned forward, his voice gentle. Then let's figure it out together. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Hell, I don't have all the answers. But we can start small. What do you like? What makes you happy? Her golden eyes met his, filled with a tentative hope. You make me happy. Daryn. His breath caught, but he forced himself to stay composed. That's a good start, he said softly. But there's more to life than making someone else happy. We'll find it. One step at a time. A faint smile touched her lips. Thank you, Daryn, for giving me the chance to discover who I am. Always, he replied. You're not alone in this. For the first time since her arrival, Liora seemed at peace. And for the first time in a long while, so did Daryn. The soft glow of Mars's twin moons bathed the prefab in silvery light, casting long shadows across the room. Daryn sat on the edge of the couch, his head in his hands, the weight of recent events pressing heavily on him. Across from him, Liora watched him quietly, Her golden eyes filled with concern. "You've been silent for a long time," she said softly. "Are you angry with me?" Daryn looked up, meeting her gaze. Her vulnerability struck him like a bolt to the chest. And he shook his head. "No. Liora. I'm not angry. I'm just trying to figure out what comes next." The past weeks had been a whirlwind. Liora's presence had upended his once solitary life, challenging every notion he had about companionship, identity, and what it meant to care for someone. She wasn't just an alien companion gifted by a baron, she had become a person in his eyes, her own person. Even if she hadn't realized it fully yet. "I don't want you to feel trapped here," Daryn continued. "You're not bound to me. No matter what Thyxar or anyone else said. If you want to leave, to explore, to figure out who you are beyond what you were designed for, I'll help you." Liora tilted her head, her expression a mix of surprise and confusion. "But I do not feel trapped. Daryn. Being with you, it feels right. It feels like home." Her words sent a warmth coursing through him. But he forced himself to stay rational. That might be true now. But what about later? What happens when you start wanting more than this little prefab on Mars? When you realize you deserve more than what I can give you? Liora crossed the room in a few graceful steps. Kneeling in front of him, she reached out, her slender hands resting on his knees. "Daryn. Do you think I am unaware of my own feelings? My time with you has taught me more about myself than I ever thought possible. I do not want to leave. Because this, us, feels like the life I want to build." His breath caught as her golden eyes shimmered with unspoken emotion. "I may not have all the answers about who I am," she continued. "But I know this, I choose to be here. With you. Not because I was given to you. But because I care for you. Because I love you." For a moment, the weight of her words stole the air from his lungs. He had spent so long running from attachments, building walls around his heart. And yet, this alien woman had torn them down with a quiet grace he hadn't seen coming. "I love you too, Liora," he admitted, his voice raw with honesty. "More than I thought I could. You've changed my life, hell. You've changed me." Her smile lit up the room. And she leaned forward, resting her head against his chest. They stayed like that for a long time. The silence between them comfortable and warm. In the days that followed, they worked to build something new together. Daryn encouraged Liora to explore her own interests, finding joy in watching her light up as she discovered painting, tinkering with old machines, and even gardening in the prefab's tiny hydroponic setup. For her part, Liora pushed Daryn to embrace life beyond his self-imposed isolation. She insisted they visit settlements, meet people, and rediscover the galaxy he'd left behind. Slowly, Daryn began to open up again, his gruff demeanor softening in ways he hadn't thought possible. Their bond grew deeper with each passing day, not as master and servant, but as equals. As partners navigating the complexities of life together. One night, as they sat outside the prefab, watching the Martian sky glitter with stars, Liora turned to him. "Do you think the universe planned this for us?" she asked, her voice soft. "That we were meant to find each other?" Daryn chuckled, pulling her closer. "I don't know about the universe. But I know I'm damn glad you showed up on my doorstep. You've made everything worth it." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then maybe that's enough. Maybe we don't need the universe's plan. We'll make our own." And as they sat beneath the endless sky, Daryn couldn't help but feel a quiet hope stir in his chest. For the first time in years. He wasn't just surviving, he was living. And with Liora by his side. He knew the future. No matter how uncertain. Was worth facing.